Yeah, they're not going to need it. For example, we're not spending money in Venezuela right now. I mean, obviously, look, I think you're putting aside embassy operations and all of that. And by the way, there may be some program through foreign aid that some of you might be interested in the future. We don't think that Venezuela is the kind of country that needs that.
Senator Merkley echoes concerns about delayed oversight and sharply questions the secrecy, legal reasoning, and financial handling of U.S. actions tied to Venezuela. He presses for transparency, warns against subsidizing U.S. oil companies abroad, and raises constitutional issues about how funds are being controlled and spent.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to associate myself with the comments of Tim Kaine. The fact that we're 5 months into this, and this is the first oversight hearing, is really a complete failure of the responsibility of Congress, failure of this committee to demand oversight, but also a reflection of the reluctance of the administration to engage in the proper consultation with Congress. So I hope we can do a lot better going forward, and that we'll see you at least every 6 weeks or so, not every five months. I also feel like the strategy of keeping basically these very weak arguments secret so that they can't be discussed openly for the legal justifications. I've gone down and read them, and there's a reason obviously you'd be incredibly embarrassed if those were public. So make them public. Let's have an actual transparency here in the United States of America. And let's be clear about what has gone on. We had a dictator we didn't like. We've replaced it with a dictator we think we can manipulate. And if that doesn't work, we'll do something else in order to pry open that economy for oil. And I must say that you did say something I liked. So let me emphasize that.
We're making progress.
Yeah. You said no U.S. taxpayer dollars will be used, no spending on our part, to kind of prop up Venezuela. Can you restate your commitment to that?
Yeah, they're not going to need it. For example, we're not spending money in Venezuela right now. I mean, obviously, look, I think you're putting aside embassy operations and all of that. And by the way, there may be some program through foreign aid that some of you might be interested in the future. We don't think that Venezuela is the kind of country that needs that. This is a very wealthy country.
Thank you. I'm glad you restated that, because I think that we will see some moment when the administration says, let's subsidize our American oil companies to rebuild the infrastructure in Venezuela. And I must say that's a very unpopular idea among my constituents. I think America needs a lot of investments in infrastructure here. And I think you have a way too rosy sense of the oil economy there. Many experts have said, look, without 10-year prospect horizon of stability, without Canada deciding to ship a lot more of its heavy oil instead of to the Gulf, doing it to Asia so that we prop up the kind of demand in the Gulf, without keeping Iran off the international stage so that the cost of oil, the value is higher. All of those factors would have to be there for our oil companies to want to invest their own money. So I think they'll be coming to the administration. I think you'll all be trying to find some way to subsidize them. But I'm glad what you said today, that you're not going to do it, and I want to hold the administration accountable to that. Second, on terms of the $500 million fund, $300 million, my understanding, has gone back to the central bank of Venezuela, and they have essentially exchanged it for bolivars to key industry players. I don't think we have any transparency on what corporations or entities got that hard currency. And yet you did say there's going to be a lot of transparency. You also said, if I understood right, that those funds are eventually going to be brought back into the structure of U.S. control as part of our, formal structure of funds. And in that sense, the Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made in law. So are you going to make sure that if that money comes back into kind of full U.S. control, not an offshore account the way it is now, that we're going to abide by the Constitution? Third point here is that one of the things that transpired is cutting off the oil to Cuba. And I know you have a strong interest in making life difficult for the leadership in Cuba.
Senator Merkley opens by aligning himself with Senator Kaine's criticism of the lack of congressional oversight. He makes clear that being 5 months into a major foreign policy and military-related effort without a single oversight hearing represents a serious failure. In his view, this reflects not only on Congress, but also on the administration's unwillingness to engage in proper consultation. He stresses that oversight should be routine and ongoing, not delayed for months, while major decisions and actions move forward without public accountability. Merkley then turns to the administration's legal justifications for the operation. He states plainly that he has read the arguments and describes them as extremely weak. He suggests that the real reason they remain classified is because they would not withstand public scrutiny. By calling for those arguments to be made public, Merkley is making a broader point about transparency in a democracy. He argues that Americans deserve to see and debate the legal reasoning used to justify major foreign policy actions, rather than having those decisions hidden behind secrecy. He also offers a blunt assessment of the broader strategy. Merkley describes the situation as replacing one dictator with another that the United States believes it can influence or manipulate. He frames this as a cynical approach that risks repeating past mistakes, where U.S. policy is driven more by economic interests, particularly oil, than by genuine democratic principles. His comments reflect concern that this pattern damages U.S. credibility and undermines claims that American actions are truly about supporting freedom and democratic governance. Merkley then highlights a point where he says he agrees with Rubio: the statement that no U.S. taxpayer dollars will be used to prop up Venezuela. He makes a point of getting that commitment restated on the record. This is not presented as casual agreement, but as a way to establish a clear line of accountability. Merkley signals that he expects the administration to be held to this promise, especially because he believes there will be pressure in the future to subsidize U.S. oil companies to rebuild infrastructure in Venezuela. He explains that such subsidies would be deeply unpopular with his constituents, who believe American resources should be invested at home. Merkley challenges what he sees as an overly optimistic view of Venezuela's oil economy. He references expert assessments that suggest large-scale private investment would require long-term stability and favorable global market conditions. Without those conditions, he warns, oil companies are unlikely to invest their own money and will instead seek government support. Merkley makes clear that he expects such pressure to come and wants to ensure that taxpayers are not used to underwrite risky foreign ventures. Merkley then raises serious concerns about the handling of a large fund connected to Venezuela. He notes that hundreds of millions of dollars have reportedly been transferred back to Venezuela's central bank and exchanged for local currency to support key industry players. He points out that there is little to no transparency about which corporations or entities received that money. This lack of visibility, in his view, directly contradicts claims that the process is transparent. He emphasizes that Congress and the public should know where these funds are going and who is benefiting. He also raises a constitutional issue tied to the control of these funds. Merkley explains that if the money eventually comes back under direct U.S. control, then it must be handled according to the Constitution, which requires congressional authorization for spending. By raising this point, he is signaling that the administration cannot bypass Congress by keeping funds in offshore or indirect structures. He is drawing a clear line between executive action and Congress's power of the purse, warning that any attempt to move around that authority would be unacceptable. Merkley's remarks also touch on broader regional policy, including actions related to cutting off oil to Cuba. He acknowledges Rubio's strong stance on Cuba's leadership, but his overall tone reflects concern about how these interconnected policies are being executed without sufficient debate, oversight, or transparency. Across all of his points, Merkley is making the case that secrecy, weak legal arguments, unclear financial practices, and potential taxpayer exposure represent a dangerous combination. His message centers on restoring congressional authority, protecting taxpayers, and ensuring that U.S. foreign policy is guided by clear law, open debate, and genuine accountability.